Okay, here we go.
So typically the way I start out is I'll copy a book. And what I did with Mike's was you can copy anything that's available, obviously. But
Okay.
I'll go to our Glass Doctor site in here or account in here. And you pick a book, and this these just happen to be this version 2 is probably the one that's the most recent one.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff in here. Most of it's junk, and this is about all that makes it worthwhile. Then I went to and I picked him out of here. And just create a book name and then clone it. Takes a minute or so to clone a book. And then you can just go in and oops. And you just go in and find him once you've loaded it, or cloned it rather.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his actual site. These are all
Right.
the books that he's ever messed with or created or whatever.
Okay.
And this is the one that I just put together. And this is the tool essentially.
So then just I got a question. So when you went into, you basically cloned a book, and then did you go into his account and then specify that as something that's linked to his account? How did that linkage happen?
Did you see when I cloned the book, I selected his account?
No, I didn't see that part. I was watching. I didn't notice that part, but I remember talking through it. Okay,
so,
I just didn't.
So first I selected the account that I'm going to copy a book from, which was Glass Doctor. Then I selected his account to clone that book to that account, and it goes in here. And this is the one. This is the one that got created. So you can see today's date, just a little bit ago. So we're going to open it up here. The quick edit is kind of a review of the book itself, what's been created in there from a task standpoint. What I already went in here to this material edit, which is essentially the cost file.
Okay.
And so it's a big long list of essentially parts.
Right.
And in this case, we start out with annealed glass, and then it gets into annealed insulated glass, that sort of thing, and it just progresses through this file.
Yep.
Some of the stuff in here is relevant. Some of it isn't very relevant. What I updated was all the kind of the materials that he ends up purchasing from his flat glass suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get that up. I wanted to get that up to speed, at least up to date in terms of cost. And so what he did was he sent me kind of a price list of his current supplier costs on both annealed flat glass materials and IGUs that are fabbed and tempered glass and the like. So there's only a handful of things that are relevant here to change. With things that you can actually cut on a cutting table, annealed glass, for instance, all that stuff is you usually have to either calculate or go to what the vendor calls cut to size. In other words, it's the cost of the material that includes a waste for cutoffs and stuff like that. So that's essentially what we calculated in here. They had a calculator that helped me figure out what this cut to size was going to be per square foot. Worked out to $3.13 a square foot for just window glass, essentially clear,
Okay.
in your standard stuff. And then every item here, same thing. And I plugged in kind of some new numbers. In some cases, is a big jump from what we had in here originally.
Okay.
So, and then the anneal glass. This doesn't have any kind of weight loss factor at all, because that stuff comes prefabricated to size with a square foot cost. So those are all plugged in there. There was a few other things in here. If anybody ever requests, and I don't know if you're going to see this or not, just an increase, like some people will say, I need to increase my glass prices 5% or 7% or whatever it is. Then the easiest way to go about that is just to export an Excel file, this in the form of an Excel file. And now you're going to see what this cost file looks like in its entirety.
Right.
So you can see that it's pretty extensive. But like I said, I only changed a few things because a lot of this stuff, in fact, the biggest list of stuff in here are things called Western reflection doors and decorative doors and side lights and stuff like that. So it just takes up a lot of room. The price on those don't necessarily have to change. But if somebody was suggesting that they wanted to increase like 5%, then you just create a formula and do a multiplier. I don't know if we need to go through that, but I think you'd know how to.
No, I mean, I get what you're saying. That would be a simple way to export it, and then you can just kind of mass update everything, and then make sure things are labeled right, save it, then import it. And then that would override, I guess, what's already in there.
Exactly. So so there's a couple different ways to update the pricing, that being one of them. All right. So now that I've changed the pricing in here, there's a menu pricing factor. And did Ground Skies have a menu pricing book?
No, nothing like this. Our pricing there was based on a budget. So it was driven by the budget of the franchisee. And then it was a markup of labor, material, equipment, and material. Oh, God, there's one other category. Anyways, 4 categories of markups. And so pretty much it was just, it was all based on that. And then they could do a similar process of importing materials in, but at the Grounds Guys, their material list is pretty short. I mean, you've got, a few different kinds of mulch that you're using. It's not, they're not using a lot of products for the most part.
Sure. Well, once upon a time, virtually every concept in the Dwyer Group or Neighborly had some form of menu pricing guide, and I believe they were all kind of created in this tool. Not that I'm familiar with what everybody else was doing, but we're right on the cusp of, with the new software that's coming, that sort of thing. We'll have a whole new tool to create menu pricing, and it'll be much more dynamic. It'll be much deeper. One of the reasons, what drove a lot of this, and the way it's formatted, it's kind of all based on having kind of a hard copy book. We used to use a hard copy book, and that was what you did your presentation out of. And so rather than carry around a bunch of big binders for that process, they kind of got it down to about less than a 1-inch spiral bound booklet that you could present to the customer as your menu. And that incorporated a lot of block pricing, let's say, which some franchisees were more or less uncomfortable with in some cases.
Okay.
So that's the thing that's going to come as a change is we can be as flexible and as deep and broad as we need to be to get things to the price that the franchisee is going to be much more comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
But what we always used to, I think our motto was, the price isn't that relevant. It's more about your presentation, salesmanship, connecting with the customer, and presenting value essentially. So
Yeah.
we didn't want them to focus so much on the price and all the nitty gritty of those kinds of sensitivities, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked pretty well. I mean, Larry Patterson, for example, does $4.5 million, maybe $5 to $6 million now in menu pricing tasks that he sells day in, day out. So the other thing in here, so your labor is a separate development in here, and they call it this menu pricing factor.
Okay.
It's a crazy formula that you come up with the menu pricing factor, that we used to come up with a menu pricing factor from a budgeting standpoint.
Okay.
Couldn't even explain it. It doesn't, and even though I know the whole formula, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
Okay.
But suffice to say that this additional task is really your labor per man hour. We're talking labor per man hour. So it's this line here that probably will make more sense to the franchisees if you're ever talking to them about it. Is if you're going to sell 1 hour of labor day in, day out, what would that number be? And that's really what this additional task is.
Okay.
What the menu pricing factor is that labor number that's attached to the first task you sell, which includes some travel and some other preparatory time and stuff like that. So,
which I've heard people talking about that, I guess that concept that, whether it's a certain amount that they're figuring for the first window and then the second window is a lot less, or that first hour is this and then every quarter hour is a smaller amount. I think I've heard people, use. So it sounds like that's kind of same kind of idea.
Yeah, this is kind of an abbreviated version of just kind of taking everything into context when you're pricing out, because I don't know, franchisee technicians, for example, the way a technician thinks is he thinks in terms of when he arrives on a job and he starts to work.
Yeah.
And when he actually finishes up, when he actually cleans, is done with the installation, he thinks in terms of, oh, that's the time I'm charging for.
Right.
Well, we have the tendency to carry that forward as owners as well, that small thinking in terms of I'm not really taking into consideration all the cost involved in putting this job together. So that's kind of why this is developed the way it is, just so you know.
Yeah, that's kind of, we started spending a lot of time at the grounds guys, really getting guys to really appreciate the the expense of drive time and indirect time and downtime and callbacks, and for that same reason, because they're thinking, well, I'm just at this job, it took me 3 hours to do it, but there's all this extra drive time and other costs that need to be recovered. So our focus was on really complete overhead recovery. And what was nice about the way the estimates worked is it would show like your break-even number based on the cost and travel and things like that. So you knew here's my break-even and here's what I need to make a profit. So I appreciate you starting to go through this with me, because I've not felt like I've gotten much clarity as I've talked to franchisees about how they price. It just seems like there's lots of different approaches to it.
Exactly. So if we work with them on this, once we redevelop this tool, essentially, I think it'll make a lot more sense, because I think it'll be clearer than this allows it to be. So anyway, this is customizable as well. This is actually at one point we came along and we were developing these to budget. Later on, we started developing that kind of a set market book of sorts to try to simplify it and get more adoption, that sort of thing. And we had kind of an A, B, C, and D book, and and all those books were kind of we had kind of a generalized cost file that 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 kind of suited the whole network, so to speak. Even though there was some significant variation market to market in what people were paying for materials, and then the market was based on this menu pricing factor or this labor factor.
Yeah.
A being the highest and D being the lowest, and then they could set themselves up in whatever book they wanted, and or 1, 2, or 3 books, let's say. Now that we're more electronic than hard copy, we're kind of recommending, I think the current recommendation for the most part is, let's plug in 3 books. You have kind of a normal, easy from a lower price standpoint, harder from a higher price standpoint. Operate with 3 books, and then every day you can operate at normal, and you can jump up if you need to, or take her down if you need to, based on where in the market you're operating, or the seasonality, or whatever it is that might be driving that price up and down. So that's what we're going to do for Mike, I think. He's got more than one market. We'll see if he kicks out, wants a different setup for Great Falls, for example, versus Bozeman. Right here, the first thing he sent out was Bozeman's cost files, and so that's kind of where we're starting. And then what we can do is get on a call with Mike and kind of walk him through this, see what he thinks in terms of, let's take a standard one here, Mike. It's the most common thing he's going to sell is probably not annealed glass, IGU annealed. This sells more than any one thing in our whole system. Probably is this one right here.
Okay.
And so we'll just kind of say this is essentially what you're going to sell more of anything. Does this number look right to you? And so we're talking in terms of member price versus standard, because member is what we're trying to aim for in terms of profitability, a decent margin, that sort of thing. Typically we want members. Don't necessarily want to sell it standard. That's higher. We're trying to use this as kind of a sales approach to get members, to get people to buy a membership, for an annual membership, so they'll call us back, continue to use us. Kind of the same idea with a lot of retailers today, setting you up with a card and stuff. Anyway, so that's the thing. We'll take him through this, see if he thinks this seems to be the right number. What this is there's an hour and a half. That first hour and a half, $195. It was $130 actually for that first hour. So for that first job, rather. Yeah. And then, so there's the multiplier. Obviously, this is 8 square feet. By the way, A, B, C sizes. If you've seen them, I don't know if you've seen the Mobile Pro measure sheet.
No, I haven't. I've heard of Mobile Pro, but I've not seen anybody use it yet.
All right. So you can see this is a size B. Every alpha size is a 4 square foot increment. Remember I said that rather than operate with big binders, multiple binders, we got it down to a little spiral bound book. Right. That's that 4 square foot increment thing we're talking about. That helps narrow that book down. That's going to all go away someday, but that's where we're at right now. So we're pricing things by the 4 square foot category.
Okay.
So anyway, he's going to have to take a look at this and see if he has a feel for it. So that job that he probably sells more than anything is going to be right about that $292 area. And we'll see if he's comfortable with that. If he's not, we're going to have to rethink how we're going to price this.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's all in here. So this is what it looks like in the book. You find essentially you got your broad category IGU annealed, you got your B size, and in this thickness of material for IGUs. And then this is just kind of, this right here is just what prints out on your work order or invoice for the customer. There's an additional note here for the technician, just so he knows what he's working with in terms of a sash type.
So then just, and this may be going back a little bit. So when Mike sends you over, okay, here's my updated cost for these suppliers that we want to make changes to, then you're going in and updating the cost. Is there an automatic, or some of these factors kind of automatically adjusting the what the standard and member pricing are then for just that particular material? Or is there something you have to do to calculate that as well?
Well, it's preset. It's preset in the system. So this is just, the standard is an additional 15%. So remember, this is our kind of our target number for our profitability. This adds, the standard is plus 15% in retail price. So what we're telling is, your membership, we saved you 15%.
Right. I guess what my question is more about, like, just with each material that you're modifying in the system from what it was. So before today, certain piece of glass was X dollars, and then we're adjusting that as far as cost goes, and then you're making an adjustment to that, like one piece of material. What I was just asking is there an auto calculation in the system that then is saying for that material, this is how that affects the member price, and then that I guess that's what I'm not clear on. So
okay, so it's formulated. Oh, let's go into here. So what we were just looking at was essentially this material here. So it's annealed insulated 336 or 1/8 inch thickness glass for an IGU, right?
Yep.
Our cost is $574 a square foot from the vendor.
Right.
We're doubling the cost, and then whatever the labor factor is. So we got 4 square feet in here. If we go back, or we got 8 square feet rather in a B size. So this is our actual cost of materials is about $92, right? That's a retail.
Mm-hmm.
It's costing us half of that.
Right.
That's our cost. But that's the high end. So in other words, this could be as low as 4 square feet, or it could be as high as 8 square feet.
Right.
Hold on just a second. All right. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I don't know. Anything else? Is there anything that stands out here as a question mark for you?
No, that all makes sense. I guess, just like I said, when you're getting you're getting a list, and then you're making these, modifications. So, so how many of the prices have you actually changed so far? I mean, have you changed?
I plugged in all the glass. So it's probably everything we're going to change.
Okay.
Unless Mike can point out some additional things. He gets a chance to kind of look through it. One of the things that there's a pretty defined book in here that we can kind of bring up as a PDF. So I can send him a PDF of what these books look like.
Mm-hmm.
This is what they used to look like in a printed format.
Okay.
Let's go back here.
Well, I see a lot of value in us controlling the process here as much as possible. I mean, one, like you said, it'll get done. And two, I got to believe the franchisees are very grateful when we've been able to update this for them, and it's just done. And they advise of whether it looks good or not.
Yeah, it's surprising how how sometimes there's so little gratitude, but you've probably already experienced it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they forget. I think the things we do that are good like get forgotten like within seconds of the calls.
Exactly. Exactly. So this is kind of what those pages used to look like.
Okay.
They don't look like this in Mobile Pro, obviously. They're kind of patterned after this, but they don't have the exact same look.
Okay.
All right. So this is just plain anneal glass. So this is just, you know, a monopane that's been thrown in. We're not looking at the same thing we looked at before. You can kind of see how this works out in terms of menu, in terms of a menu presentation, let's say. If we go, there's multiple sections in here. Let's see, let's go back to this. So these are all the categories in here. So you got your anneal glass, you got your annealed IGU, tempered IGU. There's laminated glass in here, mirror, screen, standard door lights. Tabletop, probably not very well developed, tempered glass, and so on.
Now, when with what Mike sent you, I mean, how much of that did you have to make sure you were going to the right category, or how was it itemized to help you with the process?
Well, here's what he sent me. He sent me 2 different vendors, and for the Bozeman market. So he's got 2 different flat glass vendors for the Bozeman market. Okay. They don't price very much the same. My question to him was, you want me to use the highest cost on any given material? And he said yes. So that's what I plugged in. So they had a price sheet like this. Mm-hmm. See that?
Yeah.
And I only picked out the stuff that was relevant for the book, and found the prices and identified the highest cost per square foot of whatever the material was, that sort of thing.
Right.
And those are the numbers I plugged in then to the material edit.
Was there any material you had to add into the system, or that wasn't? Okay.
No, in fact, so we're not. We don't customize to that degree. That's just very time consuming.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
So all we're really trying to get here to is a profitable number for them.
Okay. So then I guess, so when you get that list and it's got, a piece of material, like it's pretty much what's in the menu pricing guide is all the standard naming conventions of these materials. So it's fairly simple to identify, okay, this is the material on the list. Here's where I find it. Now I change it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fairly limited what I'm doing here. Now, the easy thing, what all Shirley does is set up a new franchisee in one of the market books, in one of the standard market books.
Yeah.
And what Mike was working with is that, we haven't kept up with our cost files. We don't have any kind of generic network-wide cost files anymore. So to keep people on track and up to speed and profitable, we got to go through this process for now.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, so another question I had, I guess, for you. So when you said, you get that list and you're able to recognize what's relevant in the book, kind of, I guess, what's your criteria for that, or what are you keying in on that tells you this is something that I'm actually changing and this is something I'm not changing?
Well, you see these categories.
Right.
So I'm plugging in the anneal glass prices. So this whole category gets covered. So it's all the relevant thicknesses of just flat glass, clear and tinted.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's IGUs, so it's just all those. They're tinted, clear, and low E for the most part. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the subcategories, for example, it looks like this.
Right.
And all those alpha sizes, of course, I said were 4-inch increments, right?
Right.
So they go all the way from 4 square feet or less on up to plenty.
Yeah. Right.
So that's kind of, yeah. And so they all kind of work out the same in that regard. So here's mirror, for example. It's all just either 1/8 inch or quarter, and it's either clear or some version of tin.
Okay, so maybe I'm not understanding. So, okay, so on that, is it fair to say then when you got that list of materials from those vendors, you went in, so everything that was on the list Mike gave you, you updated, or were there things on the list that maybe that's what I was confused with. So when you're saying things that are relevant to the book, it's just only things that are on my list from the vendor, but everything on the list from the vendor you went in and made a change to.
Well, here's kind of what we're aiming for, Eric, we could try to get this book to work about 80% of what you're going to run into out there.
Sure.
And they go out there and they're going to see the same stuff over and over and over again. And every once in a while they'll see something that's just a little different.
Right.
And that they just have to price independently through their other methods.
Right. Yeah, and I guess my approach, since I'm someone who doesn't know very little about glass, like I get a list and I'm like, look, to me everything's relevant, because I don't know like, okay, what's the common stuff and things. I'm just curious. I've had a few people I've talked to that I'm concerned about their pricing, where I think this is an exercise that I want to take them through, and I'm sure like when I do it, I'll get help. But so it's very, I see there being a lot of, because I think even like, I might have even been talking to Ed, and I was just like, when's the last time you updated your costs? He's like, well, I don't know, like he doesn't know. So it's probably a common, like thing, right? I don't know.
Well, so here's the main thing. I mean, the clue, your best clue, of course, is where's he running in his financials from a cost of goods standpoint. So what we're trying to do is drive them down to about a 25% cost of goods on their flat glass.
Right. Overall. Well, I'm going to show you something just for fun. I did not know he's not seen the KPI sheet before. And so this is just to give you a sense. I don't know if I can share my screen real quick.
Sure.
I'll show you what his numbers were. Let's see. All right. So this is.
No, if they do a lot of project work, if they do a lot of contract construction, that's going to drive up their margin generally. Right. But from a services standpoint, like this kind of stuff, home services, that sort of thing, that's that 25% we're looking for.
Yeah. So here's Ed's numbers. And so everything's in red pretty much with his cost of goods sold, and labor is a huge factor. So I didn't know he'd never seen one of these before. So he was kind of like, this is depressing. I thought he told me, he said, don't show Brad. They may take my Franchisee of the Year trophy away.
Exactly.
I said, man, we've already engraved it. We can't take it back. So,
yeah.
But I think for him,
we are disappointed in you.
Right. So now I think it's a couple things. I think he probably has more capacity, but he and I did talk about price. And I guess my point in just showing this, I think there's probably quite a few people who could revisit what you're doing for Mike. To let's just reevaluate your costs, make sure that we've got updated information in there. So anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of this. So
yeah, no, that's a good one, and you got to keep that in front of them because they got to be making decisions about their business. The other thing is that there's times when I think when we were in the recession, the glass prices hardly went up. But as soon as the recession peaked and construction started to pick back up, we had price changes every few months.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 or 4 a year sometimes.
Yeah.
Cost increases. So the guys you just got to remember that they need to stay on top of their costs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, do you think it's something that's good to evaluate like once a year or something at least, or is it?
I don't know why not. But you can follow it, of course, in your financials.
Yeah.
Because you can obviously can break out the flat individually.
And then I would imagine, like you're describing, depending upon the economic cycle, if there is a kind of a general spike in prices, or like you're saying, if construction is on the rise and material costs are significantly going up, then it's kind of like because of that event that would trigger, hey, let's kind of readjust our pricing because the costs are going to significantly go up, and we don't want to wait till that annual process. So,
right. So it's just trying to keep them profitable. So if you start to see that gross profit start to slip away, then you better make an adjustment.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty simple. I think I'll just have to, what'll help me is if I can get some people to let me work on some of this stuff with them. And I think it looked like it's just a methodical process, that you went through. So, so at this point then, are you going to schedule a call with Mike then or something to kind of, when you're ready to go through this stuff and then get his take on it?
Sure. And so I'll send him an email yet today. And I'll copy you on it, and I'll just say, when you get a chance, Mike, let's sit down and kind of go through what we have so far, and we'll take it from there.
No, I think that's great. So, and this will be really helpful for me, like I said, Jay, because I think I've got quite a few people that need to do this, and I think it would help me to create value for them to be able to kind of like, let's look at this and just kind of make sure things are lined up properly and and that. So, and then I'll reach out to Shirley to get, whatever credentials I need to be able to go in there. I guess one other question that I had, so because as I was following you along, when you've got someone like Mike that has multiple locations, and you mentioned, these were some of the prices for Bozeman, it looked like it was just one account for Mike. So is that just like he has those books available and then he just selects the appropriate one for the location, or did you attach, this book to the Bozeman location?
No, so he just got one site. He's got one database here in this menu pricing in the tool.
Okay.
And so, but we can create multiple books or any number of books, or we can just we just create a variation based on labor, let's say, on several books. So that's real easy to do. If they have multiple locations and they're finding that, they're just different priced markets, or they have vendors, different vendors, and their costs are different, that sort of thing, you can make adjustments for that.
Okay. I would imagine in general that even someone with multiple locations, that the pricing isn't going to be that much different. Like, would that
Generally not. I don't know. I think what Mike said was that the less expensive vendor was only available to Bozeman, if I understood him correctly.
Oh, okay.
But what I don't know is that he's got this Associated Glass, for example, that based on, where they're at delivery. I mean, Montana's a pretty big state. They may charge them different pricing in different markets too. So who knows?
Right.
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Well, and I like the idea of going with the highest price. That was something we did at the Grounds Guys too, because we were like, if you go with the highest price on your materials, then, in worst case scenario, you got to pay the higher price, but you're covered, versus if you go with an average or on the low end. And we would also, again, the materials weren't nearly as complicated, so they would even be more general. So I had some people that would want to put every different type of plant. Other people were like, okay, for a 4-inch plant, here's what the cost generally is, and that's what we're going with. And it's not, it's pennies difference here and there, but it's not significant to like screw your pricing up.
Simpler is usually better. Some people overthink this stuff.
Yeah, I had one guy. I mean, they do. You can imagine when you start installing patios, for example, that the limitless number of materials you could use. So this guy had 4 suppliers, and he literally put every material from all 4 suppliers. And I was like, man, and he's wanting to track all this stuff. And I'm like, man, I don't know, but he was effective at what he did, but it just was so complicated to look at and then try to follow. Cause I'm like, you also have to teach your employees to do this. And,
that's crazy.
Are they really going to do it? I mean, is that really that significant? And with those kind of projects, usually you don't have so much waste that it's an issue, versus something like mulch, for example, where if you're laying a 3-inch layer of mulch, if someone's not doing it properly, they might lay 4 or 5 inches, and you spend a lot more money. So something like that's more relevant to track than every little, screw and nail that you're using or whatever. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're the larger corporations, for example, they make their money on the whole system. They don't pick out markets to raise prices and lower prices necessarily, right?
Right.
They just make money on their whole book of business.
Well, I'll be curious with Servant, like how, how the pricing will function, if it'll be a similar kind of a thing.
I think it's going to be a lot easier to manage, and it's going to be more definitive price wise. One of the things we struggle with, it's hard to make that argument that don't focus so much on the details, just go out and sell it. At least we'll have a system, I think, that will make more sense to the franchisee. I think one of the things that the downside of this is it's too complicated for most of them, and they don't have confidence in it. And if they don't have confidence, they're not going to sell crap.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's got to be just kind of simple to understand, and it's easier to get them engaged in it. So. Well, I'll look forward to talking to Mike. I'll be curious as to kind of watch you kind of as we go through it to get his take on things. And so if you just whenever you guys can meet, I'm starting to get people on calls, but I've still got a lot of flexibility with things. So if you just let me know, when it is, I'm sure I can make it work.
Sure. Okay. Well, let me ask you this: the next couple of days now. Have you got a lot of time open?
Yeah, like let's say tomorrow morning. Now I guess he's on. Mountain. They're on Mountain Time. Okay, so they're just an hour behind us, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, like say for example, tomorrow after the huddle, I've got a call with John Goldsmith at 12 o'clock Central. So, but pretty much between our huddle and 12 o'clock, I can do anything in there. And then pretty much after that call, so 1 o'clock Central until 3 o'clock Central, I could meet.
And all right, then, I'll throw out a couple times to Mike for tomorrow, and then say, did any of this work for you? And we'll see where he settles.
Yeah, and you probably know how to do this, but you can access my calendar on Outlook.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could look and see. And the only thing I'm going to take out, I had a lunch for Friday, not a lunch, but just so I think I've just updated. So there's nothing. The only thing that's blocked, let's see, on Thursday, I've got the weekly excellence meeting, which I've sadly never attended. So I probably should do that at some point. But that's the only thing blocked out on my schedule that I wouldn't have to do.
Okay.
So. I guess that's bad. I shouldn't say that.
Well, sometimes we're the only ones on that call.
Okay, so I need to get on anyway. Okay, well, awesome. Well, Jay, thanks, man, for your taking the time and helping me to kind of get acclimated to this menu pricing guide and all this stuff. So I'll look forward to meeting with you and Mike and then going through the next thing, and I'll get my credentials meanwhile from Shirley.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Hey, have a good day then. Thank you.
All right, Eric. Take care.
Bye.